the conversation on reparations more, let's just say, frustrating, or is it more nonsensical, or is it just good old-fashioned boring? However, there was one town in Illinois that found a way to pull this off, granted a very, very small amount of money, and you guys know my feelings on this topic. I've said it on multiple occasions and even done a few videos on it. However, though, it's not exactly the win that these people think.
Adrian and Mark, in each of these places where reparations are being considered, questions remain among them. Who will pay for it? And where will the money come from? As for the city of Evanston, they're funding their reparations program through marijuana and real estate transfer taxes. Back to you.
I want you to remember that line because we're going to be coming back to it quite heavily in this video. So a small suburban town outside of Chicago was able to approve roughly $25,000 in reparations payments to 40 individuals that live in their town. Yet somehow or another, some people in the media are classifying this as some form of victory. However, it's a little bit murkier than you think. Now, guys, like I said before to open this video, I've told you guys my feelings on this topic. Also, something else, too, it does seem a little bit infuriating, especially when you talk to people who think that the wealthier in the country should pay a lot more in taxes. I got a bit of a different approach on that. I think you can actually balance that out while at the same time giving tax cuts to those below, and it might get things working. But then again, though, at the same time, though, I'm always going to be in the camp that I want my taxes kept relatively low, even though I'm not a wealthy person. And I understand that the wealthy, obviously, have got to take care of the jobs. They got to pay for... let's see, they got to pay people's salaries, they got to pay their hourly wages. So I'm not exactly okay with taxing the rich unless it's an extreme circumstance. Also, something else to go on top of this, and yeah, I got a fly flying around, or a moth or whatever flying around in front of the camera. I kind of can't do anything about it right now because bitch is just, I don't have a fly swatter. So yeah, it is what it is. But here's the deal. The thing about taxing the wealthy, and like I said, we'll get back to reparations here in a second, is I have to constantly remind people, you know, what right do you have to this person's money? They don't have any right to them at all. However, I would be okay with a woke tax, meaning that if you went woke, then we're going to tax you a little bit extra, of course, mostly for just being stupid because you choose to piss off your customers by pushing a political agenda that, quite frankly, they did not ask for. But getting back on topic to this story, so I'm going to go ahead and play these next 3 minutes for you guys, and then we're going to come back to what I showed you at the very beginning.
With a promise to pay reparations to its African-American residents for facing years of discrimination.
Clearly, this is a very controversial issue. Evanston, Illinois, set aside $10 million over the next 10 years for the reparations fund. There are a lot of critics who say this is just a government handout. Supporters say it's one step in the fight to address a history of wrong. They want to be a model for the rest of the country. And Nick is here with a closer look. Evanston is the first to do this, right?
They are indeed, Adrian, and it could be a test run for the entire country. Communities throughout the country are keeping a close eye on Evanston, Illinois. That's because the Chicago suburb is doing what they said they were going to do: pay reparations to black residents that dealt with discrimination decades ago, a move considered by many to be a test run for the entire country. $10 million over the next 10 years. It's the promise the Evanston, Illinois City Council made to its black residents back in 2019.
Of course, it's not the 40 acres and a mule, but it's a start.
Evanston is the only municipality nationwide that is using a reparations fund to pay black residents who were discriminated against and faced a lack of access to housing. To qualify, individuals must have lived in the city between 1919 and 1969 and were at least 18 years old.
I'm exceedingly full of joy to see that there are people who are recognizing people of color.
It's a long process, but for those who were approved, they will receive $25,000. Of the 48 reparation recipients so far, some have decided to use that money for home improvements or mortgage assistance, as other cities like St. Paul, Minnesota, and Amherst, Massachusetts look to start their own reparations committee. Critics argue the reparations payments are simply government handouts.
I've been saying this from day one, that reparations is more than cash payments. And it's unfortunate that that has become a linchpin or a starting point for people who are against it. There's a myriad of other things in reparations.
But in California, a decision to take up recommendations for reparations sits with the state legislature after a reparations task force delivered an 1,100-page report to lawmakers and Governor Gavin Newsom. Included in the document, recommendations for dozens of policy changes and payments of up to $1.2 million to those who are descendants of black slaves or those who had relatives that arrived before 1900.
The time has come. America must step up. It's not just the well-being of people of African ancestry that is on the line. It is the very heart and soul of this country. If America is...
Adrian and Mark, in each of these places where reparations are being considered, questions remain among them. Who will pay for it? And where will the money come from? As for the city of Evanston, they're funding their reparations program through marijuana and real estate transfer
Fortunately,
taxes.
for a lot of towns, they don't have people who live within a certain time frame or lived in that city within a time frame. And then to go on top of that, only $25,000, which is exactly what I said. If you got a reparations check, it would be pretty much nil. So what's the point in even going after it? Not to mention all the politics around it and why it is that people continue to pump this narrative that I'm oppressed, even though you didn't live during the time of slavery. Don't worry, we'll get to that a little bit later, because Piers Morgan, Douglas Murray, and the boys over at Piers Uncensored, I guess is the name of the show, they had an extremely eye-opening take that we'll get to here shortly. But here's the deal. You're paying with it for revenue from legalized marijuana. Well, does anybody need to ask any serious questions on this? We know who the main drug users in the United States are. I'm not saying this to knock anybody. I'm just giving you guys the actual honest-to-God truth. It's mostly people of color who smoke marijuana. Of course, Illinois, marijuana is legal, but Illinois also does this other thing too. Extremely high state taxes, which makes me wonder that if the overall total that this individual that you saw did not receive anything more than maybe $15,000 to $16,000 rather than the $25,000 check. Those 40 individuals' checks, by the way, could have also been smaller than the others. So how does this actually help? What really, on the other hand, though, does kind of, I wouldn't say concern me, but it really does, let's just put it this way. I think when Douglas Murray, who you're about to see here in a second, says that it's boring, it may be the reason why he's saying it's a boring take, because when you see that lady with the earrings of Africa, I ask her, I would be willing to ask, would you be willing to go to Africa today? Africa, by the way, a nation that still practices slavery, which, by the way, at the same exact time sold people into slavery here to the United States. I just got to ask the question, would you be willing to go there and spend a couple of days? Well, I'm pretty sure these people would say, no, we would not do that, or they may give you some type of smug answer. Also, something else, too, when you hear that guy say it's about more than cash payments, is it really? I don't think it's about anything. I don't think it's about anything more than money. It just seems like a good old-fashioned quick cash grab. As I've said on multiple occasions, it's not like you'd be receiving millions of dollars in reparations here. You would, for the most part, be receiving a total sum at best, maybe $50,000, $60,000, maybe a little bit more. But exactly how far is that going to get you in life, especially given the fact that you're just going to use that to spend that money on some very, very cheap commodities to make yourself look good? I just don't see how the hell it helps. You get to Piers, and I've got my issues with Piers Morgan. I remember when he was on CNN, he was constantly doing the whole gun-grabbing narrative. I mean, just the common red coat is exactly the way I thought about him. Funny, especially given the fact that I'm actually doing a documentary piece on some redcoats. But the thing is this right here. That's all Piers Morgan has been, but I got to admit he's gotten a little bit better since leaving CNN. So they had a debate the other night between himself, Douglas Murray, and a lady that's already on the set. I think she's on the set of that show. And Douglas Murray had this right here to say.
To be genuinely proud of our great countries, both America and United Kingdom, two of the greatest countries in the world. It's almost like every day now, somebody somewhere, normally on the left, the woke left, is queuing up to find a reason to hate the countries and their histories.
Well, it's a kind of grievance competition. Your guest earlier just tried to engage in it. I don't know what hurt she believes she's had from slavery. All of this was addressed 2 centuries ago. Everything has consequences. All history has consequences and ramifications. But, if we were to play this fairly, we would at least look at all of the countries around the world that engaged in the slave trade who are simply not interested in any form of reparations. The Ottoman Empire, all the Arab countries, countries who not just traded far more slaves than across the Atlantic, but castrated all the men so that there wouldn't be any more African slaves after them. They worked them to the bone. I see no interest across Africa in paying reparations for selling their brother and sister Africans into slavery or for working them to the bone to the present day. There is slavery across Africa today. In fact, there are more slaves in the world today than there were at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. So some of us are simply a bit bored of hearing people ripping at closed wounds and then crying about their hurt or their presumed hurt. Because everybody could do this. 1 million Europeans were stolen by North Africans over the course of decades of the North African Barbary pirate slave trade. Where would you end if you did that? The answer is you couldn't end, because nobody is alive who has actually suffered the hurt, and nobody is alive who did the wrong. And I'd make one other point, if I may. It's always the countries that people want to come to who are put through this struggle session. Britain, like America and France, are the most desired destinations for migrants worldwide and have been for centuries. Why is that? It's not because we're racist, it's because we're better, it's because we're good, it's because when we see racism, we actually call it out and recognize it as a sin. Try finding that across Africa, try finding that across the Middle East or in China. Nobody would hear. So what we have is a situation where the more virtuous countries are presented as the worst countries. It's sick, and most of us are tired of it.
Is it a boring conversation? Is it mind-numbing? Definitely. Is it frustrating? Oh yeah, it's frustrating. As I said before, what gives you a right to somebody else's money? Even though I think this is actually kind of funny, especially seeing how it is that it's a bad habit within that community, which, by the way, a lot of people in that community don't want to be known for, that right there being the usage of marijuana that's covering the reparations, which, once again, I think is almost like a hollow gesture when you think about it, because the money is so low. And you're using it for something that, quite frankly, you could have worked for or saved your money for. Meaning that if you had actually saved your money, you could have maybe found a way to, I don't know, man, maybe collected $15,000 to $16,000, which, by the way, would be your own money and not taxable because you put it away over time. And, of course, that there meaning that you actually worked for it, you put a little bit of money here and there away, and you were actually able to pull this off, because at the end of the day, there's $25,000 in the state of Illinois, especially given the city taxes and given the state's tax revenue, and of course federal taxes. Yeah, you're probably going to see only about maybe $16,000 to $17,000 at best of that money. It may be a little bit more, but still at the same time, it's not like you couldn't have saved up. It's not like you couldn't have put this money away. And it kind of goes back to the same simple premise that maybe if you had just used the things that most people use, people who don't scream and holler about things that happened 200 years ago, you probably would have had this. You wouldn't be getting taxed, and at the same time, you wouldn't be creating the jealousy that comes amongst most communities. One of the main problems that we have with this whole reparations conversation is, do we have to give the LGBTQ community reparations, even though they, quite frankly, are not oppressed at all, never have been oppressed? I'm sorry, it's the way that it is. Do we have to give this community over here money? Oh, wait, here's an idea. What like Douglas Murray was saying, are you going to ask for reparations from the people that, quite frankly, put you in bondage 200 years ago? Which, by the way, you're not in bondage anymore. You haven't been in bondage since 1865. Now, granted, there's been some cases, and there was Jim Crow in the South, but, I mean, think about it really quick. Civil rights movement, didn't Martin Luther King do that so that way you guys would have the same opportunities? I mean, we had to create this whole law called affirmative action for you. Also, something else, too, about the affirmative action in colleges, I didn't mention this before. The test scores for people of color are much, much lower than those of Asians. Do we got to give Asians reparations? You see, you're opening an extremely large can of worms with this. And also something else, too, going back to what Murray was saying about America being the greatest country in the world. Yeah, America is the greatest country in the world. England, probably a very, very close second. France, not so much. I don't think the frogs actually deserve to be put in the same category as the United States or England. It's just the way that it is. I mean, you guys are complaining about this, but like I said earlier, would you be willing to go somewhere like, say, I don't know, Pakistan, Afghanistan, China? I mean, somewhere in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia. I mean, you ain't got to live there. I'm not telling you to move there. I'm not telling you that at all. I'm just saying that you got it very, very good here. I mean, if you move to South Africa, an economy that could very well collapse here soon, a lot like ours. I mean, your life would already be bad as it is over there. It would be much, much worse after that. I just want you to think about that, because even in a collapsed U.S. economy, even here, even in this very, very bad state that we're in now with rampant inflation, you've still got it better than most people out there in the world, which makes what this person here says make it pretty clear that these people have no idea exactly how good they have it.
So sorry that Douglas is bored by the pain that has come from
That's not what he said.
through slavery.
He didn't say. He didn't say. But what you're doing there, yeah, but hang on, Paula. Paula, you're being very disingenuous. That's not what he said.
I am.
And viewers aren't stupid. They know exactly what he said. He's not saying he's bored by the pain. He's saying, and I think it's a perfectly valid point, the pain that people who are alive today are claiming they're suffering for what happened 200 or 300 years is not a real pain. They're not the ones who suffered what was going on 200 or 300 years ago.
So, in terms of justice for all, I mean, I think we'd all agree that there should be justice.
Well, I'm not suffering from when the Normans invaded this country.
Agree.
I'm not suffering from what my ancestors went through.
I noticed that I've not been allowed to respond.
Or from the Romans. In other words, where do you take this? I mean, should I now be feeling pain from what the Romans did to this country?
In terms of slavery, I can take it to 2015, when the slave owners were compensated by the government. So I can take it to that extent.
But where does your personal pain come?
And I can say to you that I don't think that apologising is a bad thing. I think that apologising for a wrong is a good thing. I think that the Dutch royal family have done a fantastic thing in acknowledging what has gone wrong
I hear you, but
society.
I honestly think it'll make no difference at all.
As I've said before, what right do you have to somebody else's money? Also, as I've also said on multiple occasions, and I know that I said also because I also, Fact of the matter is this right here. You're asking for something that happened over 200 years ago. And you want to know why it is that people are beginning to get irritated. You know, in that last video I did on Anna Kasparian, where I did a kind of a follow-up on what she was talking about with the whole affirmative action thing, there was something that Stitch said in that video that was very, very eye-opening, something that myself and many others can kind of just go ahead and call on out. The more and more that you pump the whole race narrative and you owe us, the more and more discontent you will create. So you got to ask yourself a question. If we gave you the money, on a great big giant federal scale, which by the way would also just end up equating to maybe $100,000 at best after taxes, what good is it going to be once you've spent it all in 2 days on commodities that quite frankly you do not need or do not want or will want in the long run? It just makes me wonder. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. So, yeah, while it is boring, it's infuriating. I would also say it's more useless because obviously there are people out there who keep screaming and hollering for this cash, who keep screaming and hollering for people because they feel that the world owes them something, yet they're not willing to go out there and actually get it themselves. And of course, they obviously feel this way. But at the same time, like I said, what good is the conversation anymore? I mean, we already know what the hell is going to happen as a result of it. But I do find it funny, though, that it was actually the legalization of marijuana, which, by the way, is primarily used by people of color that are actually paying for this very, very minuscule amount of money that's being dished out. That right there, my friends, is all for today. I'm probably going to have a much, much longer form video out tomorrow. It's going to be on the situation as a whole over at Disney with ESPN and everything and what's probably going to happen in the future with that. I did do a video that's released tonight about what's going to happen with the film industry, especially given this strike that's going on, and how it is that AI could bother us. That video will be out at 7 p.m. tonight. This video right here will be out at 5 p.m. Make sure you guys hit that like button. Also, if you're new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe. If you think I have earned your subscription, please hit that subscribe button, cut on the notification bell. Also, one more thing, too. Please leave a comment in the comment section. I would love to get you guys' thoughts on this, and I will see you guys later.